Hello, all, and welcome to the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and chit chat about intriguing and sometimes controversial topics through the lens of skepticism. With us today is Richard Gilliver from the Skeptic Takeout, Laura McGee from Unapologetically Me, and Richard Gill from the Yorkshire Atheist. Today, we are going to be talking about the book, the Word, the one true God, and the Jesus. So, grab your English tea or hey, your English tea. Hit that like and subscribe button and join us as we skepticize whether or not you can determine truth from this very specific ancient book. This is episode 28, the Bible.
Came with props.
Awesome! Oh, the Bible.
Do you want me to outdo you?
No, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't.
outdo him. Let's see it. Oh, it's probably like 4 inches thick. Holy cow.
No, Holy Bible.
That is the holiest of holy Bibles. Wow.
It's just a little book inside. It's just got a fancy cover.
It's probably one of those like jewelry boxes or like keepsake boxes, right? Where you open it up and it's hollow.
It's full of artwork by Rembrandt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it is. It's all
cool.
illustrated by Rembrandt paintings. Yeah,
That
pretty
is
cool book actually.
Dude, that'd be worth collecting just to collect. That's neat. I like that. I got rid of a lot of my holy texts from both Christianity and Islam after I left both religions, but I kept one little holy Bible. And it was because my aunt gave it to me when I was a really, really little girl. But it has like the prettiest, like it's like the really clear, almost like tracing paper throughout the whole Bible. Yeah. And then every like, I don't know, 20 or 40 pages or so, there's illustrations and they're like beautiful. So I still have that just for the art value of it.
This Bible I've got here is the confirmation edition. So I don't know if it's a thing in other denominations of Christianity, but in the church, common thing for children to be baptized as infants, and then once they're sort of aware of the fact that there's a thing called Christianity and this God guy, then they go through a process of confirmation where they go through like confirmation
with
classes.
The classes, yeah.
And so I got this, and it's all lovely, and in 2002, and it's got some lovely like calligraphy and stuff in there. It was yes, like this is a special thing to me, even though I'm not a Christian anymore. And I did go through a bit of a phase in my teenage years of like anytime I saw an interesting looking Bible or a new translation that I didn't already have, I kind of picked those all up, and that was kind of a thing I liked, like with a fancy cover or with it's physically some of the best looking and nicest made books around often. So
they're gorgeous sometimes, yeah. I think
so.
Of them.
Let's start by talking about it as a piece of artwork, then.
Yeah, no, I like that. Either artwork or literary value. Like not even getting into the really controversial stuff. I like where we're starting. But when I was in English class in one of my high school years, I think it was my junior year, we actually did a whole unit study on the Bible as a literary work. And so it was, what was the style? What was the author trying to convey? How does the style differ throughout the Bible? What's a parable versus a history versus like just a story, all those different types of writing. So it was really kind of cool to look at it from a completely outside.
How long did you do that over?
It was a semester.
That's like a 10-year project.
Well, it was so we started with things like the Garden of Eden, and we read just that part of the story, and then we digested it, and then she'd move on to another piece of the book and we digest that. But I think what she did, like at a very high school level, she took themes or ideas and was like, okay, we'll read this section, like passage, and it was maybe like the reading wasn't substantial, it was the writing and the analysis that was more substantial. So it was read this particular passage, compare it to these types of fables or psalms or poems or whatever, and do analysis on it. So it wasn't super in-depth, but it gave us an idea. I think if anything, it allowed me to look at the Bible from a different light, as not like a religious text, but as a written form of
Just a piece of literature, yeah.
yeah, absolutely, with validity in that realm.
Which I think it completely has.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Definitely.
Like the Bible's interesting to me, and I know we'll probably get into the history and lots of other things as well. But like it is a text that, despite not having originals and whatever else, it has lasted for a long, long time and can give us insights into ways that humans in the past looked at things and thought about things. It gives us insights into the things that people valued and stuff. And none of us three, I think, would give much credence to the supernatural claims of the Bible or anything like that, per se.
Not as supernatural claims, but as not as actual supernatural claims, but as stories and as literature. Yeah,
but
definitely.
the impact from that in that sort of realm, in terms of the cultural impact that the Bible has had, and the impact that it's had on even like the English language, to do with like all the words and phrases that came out of like the King James translation of the Bible and all those sorts of things. Its impact culturally, linguistically, is massive, even religious stuff aside.
Well, I think even the supernatural claims are important in the sense that, so you were talking about its historical value and allowing us to get sort of like a glimpse at the cultures and stuff. But those supernatural claims within the Bible are valid for that reason, because it really, really shows. So different cultures have different superstitions and different beliefs and different taboos. So looking specifically at the supernatural aspects of the Bible, I think, is just as valid as any other part of the Bible, because it really shows us. You start talking about how God interacts with people, or the different types of spiritual creatures, like how angels, for example, have adapted and changed based on how our cultures have adapted and changed over the years, like what they originally represented versus what they represent now to modern day Christians, right? Watching those changes occur kind of tells us a lot about the cultures that made those changes.
Yeah, I agree.
So thank you for watching Skeptic Hangout today. We've come to a natural end of our conversation.
Oh dear, is that all we have to say?
That's it.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you done some sort of scholarly insights into the Bible and that sort of thing in your studies?
In what respect?
In any respect you care to speak about.
I'm really getting interested. I've been looking at the Bible kind of from a textual perspective for a long time, but seriously for about 10 years ish. I'm getting really, really, really interested in the minute at New Testament scholarship. That's really where I'm going. I went through a phase of going through the Old Testament, but not really as a scholar, just as interest. But I'm getting really into like deep diving into a lot of the New Testament stuff and how it was formed and things at the minute. It's fantastically interesting if you're a boring tit like I am. It's one of those things where you've got to like say I've been reading the Bible from a study perspective for about 10 years, and it's only the last year or two I've kind of started looking like seriously at the New Testament stuff, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. Can't get enough of it. I'm just like, give me more books to read about it, different interpretations. And I've said it before on this show, and I'll continue saying it. A lot of people who are in our community, they go to the popular kind of agnostic scholars and take their opinions on board. But there is fucking good Christian scholars as of the New Testament, and the conclusions from a scholarly perspective are largely the same as the kind of agnostics and atheists scholars. From the perspective of the technical side of it, how the books were formed, how they were amalgamated, and what source documents they may or may not have used. There were some good arguments about it. One of my favorite things to do is if I see any kind of debates advertised between New Testament scholars of different sorts, I don't watch them live. I watch them after the fact, and I tend to skip the first 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, skip the intros.
And I try and get past the part where it tells you which one's the agnostic or atheist or which one's the theist. And I try and listen purely to the arguments and see which arguments I find the most interesting and compelling. And often I end up coming down on the theist side of it because they're not arguing for God's existence. They're arguing for the way the Bible was put together.
With some sort of scholarly integrity.
Yeah. There's some really good theistic scholars out there. Really good.
Yeah. Sort of how the Bible was put together and stuff. I think we may have mentioned this before as well. I think all of us start that every other sentence with, I think we mentioned this before. It's
because we're getting old and we've done a lot of shows now.
But like I know when I was a Christian, I knew next to, well, no, not next to nothing. I knew nothing about the creation of the Bible and how it was written. Aside from the Old Testament was written before Jesus and the New Testament was written after Jesus. And that was fully sort of all I knew about it. And obviously there's a liturgy that went on in church where we heard bits of the Bible and whatever else, but never was it even brought to our attention that like the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting how that is still not, it doesn't seem to me to be a piece of common knowledge amongst Christians. And often you see the thing online a lot, don't you, about how atheists are the people who have read the Bible or know more about the Bible than believers themselves. And for me, that certainly is the case. I know loads more about the Bible and actually, for some reason, care more about the creation of the Bible now than I was when I was a Christian. And I don't know if it's because some of the facts about the Bible's creation, how it's put together and translation and stuff, seem to take away some of the sort of integrity behind the Bible as a book and as an authoritative text. But yeah, I just find it interesting that was literally just never mentioned in church, never mentioned in Bible study, wasn't mentioned in, my confirmation classes I went to and all that lot. And then it's just as an atheist that I found all that out.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I've got a question. Sorry, Laura, go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it is interesting because I think that actually is somewhat widespread unless you decide to go to a Bible college. And even within a Bible college, unless you decide to focus on biblical history or contextual criticism or any of that kind of stuff. I think that it is definitely taken for granted from what I've noticed in religious communities where their texts come from. Because when I remember back to being a Christian, like for me, it was just like, first it was, it's just the inspired word of God, or, well, it's possible God helped write this, or it's possible this is something that God allowed to be created or wanted to be created. And that was it. That was all I thought about it. Like, cool. And I never really thought more about it. But I wonder.
A lot of the time it was the message that was important rather than the behind the scenes stuff, wasn't it? Like, that's the point.
Yeah.
You had a question, Gilliver?
I did. Try and cast your mind back. Relax. Count backwards from 10 to 1. If you can try and cast your mind back to when you were a believer, had somebody at that time when you were kind of in the height of your belief put to you that the Gospels weren't written by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, what do you think would your reaction to that have been?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't have an accurate answer to that because that those circumstances never happened. Right. But I imagine that my go-to response to that would have been that it doesn't actually matter because God has guided the writing of those books, and that even if it was decades later, maybe there are sources from before that we've yet to discover, or but basically it's just an irrelevant point because it's the inspired word of God. It's all scripture is God breathed and all that lot. And so however it was written, whoever wrote it, whenever it was written, it was correct anyway. So, and obviously I wouldn't have accepted those arguments about the Quran or about, any other sorts of other holy texts from other religions. So I understand fully the flaws of that sort of line of thinking. Laura, what about you?
Same disclaimer and pretty much same answer. Like, I don't think it would have bothered me or shook me one way or another. That specific question, like the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John weren't written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I'd be like, so some religious organization or body somewhere decided to give these books names, and that's the names they chose for them. Okay, now what? Right? Like, it really wouldn't have had much of an impact on me. In fact, I think I did actually hear that argument while I was still a Christian. And I think I even adopted that as a Christian. Like, hey, y'all Christians, you do realize they didn't really write this book, right? But it didn't change my faith in Christianity or in the book itself. It just changed my faith in how we approach it, like historically. Okay, yeah, maybe there's some stuff in there that not stuff in there, but um, maybe the way it was put together has man's hand all over it. Big whoop, you know.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is because a lot of the conversations I get into, and I stress this is more kind of with apologists and stuff, so it's not your kind of average Joe, but the most I would say of the conversations I get into when that information is presented is just, well, that's a load of bullshit. Of course they wrote them.
Wow.
So
I mean,
that as well, when you were talking about, Richard, looking at the sort of both Christian and secular scholars, and the vast majority of Christian scholars agree that they didn't write it, and that it was however many decades later. Like, that's not a controversial opinion amongst Christian scholars,
right?
But people just seem to relish in living in the ignorance of that information.
Well, I think people build their sort of reality or worldview around it. Like, some people just can't shake new truths. Like, they can't adopt them so easily. So yeah, I agree with you. It didn't seem that controversial to me as a Christian probably because of that very reason. Like, well, it's not really a big deal. Even Christian scholars say, yeah, they didn't really write them, but it's still, we need a book title, right? But it's interesting to me that because you talk to a lot more Christians from that more skeptical perspective and the epistemological, like street epistemology, that perspective. I never did that as a Christian, and I don't really do that much now as an atheist. I don't do it at all as an atheist. So it's interesting to me that that's your experience, is that so many people are like, bullshit, they wrote the books, I know for a fact, don't even talk to me about it. Like, you just lost credibility with me because you said that. Like, like, I didn't realize that was so prevalent.
It's funny as well, because it tends to be, and this is completely from my experience, so this is not meant to be any kind of argument that this is the kind of case across the board, but it tends to be that some of the ones who will say that the Gospels were written by the attributed authors are quite happy to admit that Moses didn't write the first 5 books of the Bible, whereas there are those that do. I do come across those who insist that Moses was the author.
Because that's the traditional sort of opinion on the matter.
So I have a question on that when you're done, but keep pressing.
Despite the fact that one of the books contains the record of Moses' death, so he obviously wrote it after he died. But, I mean, having said that, there were at least 10 occasions where people rise from the dead in the Bible, so it's not particularly, maybe he just rose from the dead and wrote it and it wasn't recorded that he rose from the dead. Who knows?
I've also heard it that somebody tacked on, like, well, maybe he wrote the books, but then somebody added to the end after his death or whatever. Like, I've heard a myriad different reasons for that. My question to you, oh studious one, is how
oh God, don't give me pressure.
No pressure, but you better have the answer. How did people determine in the first place? Like, how did it become a thing that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? Like, how did that become?
I don't know. I think it was just tradition. I think it was just kind of the attributed to him, much like the Gospels were attributed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John over the time as the centuries have gone on. It's just passed down into tradition. Yeah. I don't, obviously, the people who wrote it knew that they weren't Moses.
Right.
I like as well how it's like an in-universe sort of authorities like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have been attributed to the names of those people because they're significant characters within this story. but it's all in-universe authorities, like they're only important because they're in the story that
I think we should be careful as well, and I'm being tentative here because I'm not so familiar with how the Old Testament was put together and things, so I'm being tentative here, and some of this is guesswork regarding the Old Testament. But I think we should be careful not to attribute them as being the same process of attribution. So
absolutely. We don't know. We have no idea.
The Gospels weren't attributed in the same way that the Old Testament. I think the Old Testament was a more natural process.
And they weren't collected and passed down the same way, and they didn't stem from exactly the same cultures. And
they were completely different cultures, and indeed the priests of the time were the only ones who had, as far as I understand it, and I do stand to be corrected on this because I'm not 100% sure about this, but you can't be 100% sure about anything.
Insert disclaimer here.
But I think the priests had the access to the texts, and they spoke because they were the only ones who knew the original name of God. That was lost. I mean, we only have an approximation now of the name of God, and that caused lots of translation issues over the course of the years. But it was originally the priests who kind of gave I don't want to say sermons because that puts too much of a Christian spin on it, who gave the teachings, whatever they were in the temples, because there would have been temples at that time, and they were the ones who had access to the scriptures, and the people hearing the stories and passing the stories on orally would have just grown up with that, and I think it would have been a much more natural evolution. Mm-hmm. Whereas the attribution of the gospel writers was, I don't even want to say it was done deliberately as a matter of kind of deception, because I think it probably
they may have been convinced based on whatever evidence.
It was done over I think it was done over a much shorter period. Yeah. And because the Old Testament was written, the first 5 books of the Bible were written over a much longer period. You were talking probably, I can't remember the exact dates, but I think it was near enough 1,000 years from
the Old Testament has all those like full genealogies of whatever.
And we're talking just about the Septuagint, the first 5 books here, because they are the ones that were attributed to Moses, and they were, I think it was around 1,000 years. So certainly the later books were around 500 BC, I think they were, and I think the earliest ones were around 1300 BC. So it was a long time that those texts were kind of put together and things. So the tradition grew up really slowly around those. Whereas, of course, the New Testament, from the time of Jesus's death to the kind of to the finalization of the New Testament, which was a long process filled with lots of different little bits and different sects and different cults and different ideas and different opinions. That was only 400 years. It was less than 400 years between Jesus dying and the first Bible that we had in one language, one complete language. So it was a much quicker process even than the first 5 books of the Bible. And of course, then you've got the later books like Daniel, which was about 200 BC, I think it was, give or take.
I just want to take a moment to reflect on that really quick. It's going to seem totally off topic, but these books developed over thousands and hundreds of years. So when you say 400 years, that was a quick process. That is mind-boggling to me. Like, how long did it take J.K. Rowling to write the first Harry Potter? And then how long did it take her to write all the Harry Potters that she's done so far total, right? Or all the books within that lore total. Like, that happened in like a couple decades?
And she has a lot fewer plot holes than the Bible.
Yeah,
that's exactly the point, though. I think had it been written in a short period, it would have had fewer plot holes.
Right, it would have been more cohesive and coherent. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Is like,
just compare it to the Quran, which was written again. It was a longer process than some of the Muslims would have, or most Muslims would have us believe. It was around 200 years, I think, before it was we got it into a cohesive form that's anything like what we have today.
Right.
But that has far fewer plot holes than even the New Testament does.
Yeah.
Even though there
It's
were
more
divisions
coherent,
and things, there were less divisions. The divisions in the New Testament were huge, and maybe we can talk about them a little bit after the commercial break. But
yeah, let's do that. Let's take a quick break.
I
For
don't want
commercial
to
and then-
stick on. They don't stick on the New Testament all day though, because some interesting stuff in the Old Testament.
I also want to talk about like translation and stuff like that as well. So we'll definitely talk about that too.
Yeah, yeah. And I have a topic as well. I want to talk about, when you say the Bible, I want to talk about which Bible. So let's go to commercial break, and then we'll address our 3 topics.
What an exciting part 2 we've got in store.
Stay tuned, people. Don't bail on us now. It's going to get more exciting after the commercial break.
Okay, so we'll start with Laura, because you've been coming out of your shell a little bit recently. You had a bit of time off doing things, and I've noticed you sneaking about recently, popping up here and there. So tell us what you're doing.
I know, I didn't actually write down my schedule, which I should have before recording this, but I do have 2 appearances for nonprofits in September. So if you want to see me in September, just catch every nonprofit in September and you'll be fine. Yeah, and then I've been working a lot with the Promethean Frontier as well. Promethean Secular Frontier, sorry. They're wonderful people. They're still very small and they're growing, but I've been working with them as well. So I don't have anything on the books with them right now, but I just did one a couple weeks ago.
Ricardo, what are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm not doing anything like that people can see, apart from like my class when we restart the school term at the end of the beginning.
Oh, you've got that pleasure to look forward to, haven't you? Going back to school after many weeks off.
Very, very excited about all the work I haven't done in the holidays that I need to catch up.
Yes, good times.
But while I'm not doing that schoolwork, I have been taking part in discussions in the Facebook discussion group, which is a wonderful place to go and bob along and take part in some discussions about the stuff we're talking about, share some links, have some fun, and hang out with the 3 of us and all our friends. So you can find that and links to all of the different platforms you can catch a show on at linktr.ee/skeptic hangout. I had a bit of a brain fart just then.
Nice recovery though. Nice recovery. Very graceful recovery.
Yeah, nobody knows.
No, they won't know.
No. So yeah, do that.
I just want to usurp Laura a little bit by saying I'm on the nonprofits before you in September, because I'm actually on this Sunday.
Nice.
With some great people, actually. I'm on with Cynthia McDonald, who I'm so excited
I love
to
Cynthia.
work with,
Yeah.
because I've never worked with her and I love her.
Oh, she's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, who I'm a big fan of, and Secular Rarity, who's a very good friend of mine.
Wasn't he just on? Hold on, he was just on another like Talk Heathen, or
It was on Truth Wanted.
No, Truth Wanted. I'm sorry, I knew I would get it wrong. See,
Yeah.
no. So yeah, I really like him as well. That's really cool. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, and just an extra reminder to go and check out our discussion group and talk to us and shout at us and tell us where we go wrong, and
please comment about all the things Jill has got wrong this episode. Please do.
Yes, and progress the conversation. We only talk about so much of every topic because we just only have like a little over an hour, or around an hour. So yeah, get your opinions out there so we can keep the discussion going and getting it a little bit more in depth on the Facebook page.
And this is the Michael Bible episode, so see what I did there.
I don't get it, but I'm leaving it in.
the British people will get it and probably throw things at me when they see it. Yeah, so we'll see you after the commercial break. That's it.
All right. Yeah, so you were talking about like the flecks of gray in your beard. My only gray right now is my rogue stripe. So I have like this little it's like Rogue from X-Men. and it's
Love
like
it.
this perfect little. And I
You're
was
not
like,
planning
yep.
on touching anyone,
Anyway.
are you?
Yeah, so I figure if there's any way that I would want to go gray, that would be the way. Like,
Yeah, because my was just sort of the boring, slowly coming on.
the slow
on here,
fade, yeah.
slowly on here, and it's bits
Yeah,
on
but
top.
you're like
Yeah.
3.
Just one at a time. Yeah.
You know, my dad and me are the same. So like from when I was like 22, 23, I started just started on the sides here, and I've dabbled with like dyeing my hair. But I went to school, and all the other staff were like, "Have you?" I'm like, "Yeah." It was not good.
Yeah. Well, I think a little bit of gray in the hair is good.
I've embraced it. I've accepted it.
Just
It's
roll
who
with
I
it.
am.
Yeah. I like mine. I'm proud of mine. Okay, so this episode is not about going gray. This episode is about the Bible. So welcome back, everybody, from the commercial break. But we had 3 different topics that we wanted to discuss. So, Gilliver, let's get into yours first.
Which was?
You tell me, boy. You tell me. Do we need to skip? We skip you and go to the next.
Was it the how the New Testament was put together? I think may have been. Which was
No clue.
No clue. Well, we'll go with that because that's all I can remember. There was lots of different groups. The thing is, people kind of think that they were. The New Testament is one of those things where you hear the phrase a lot that the winners write history.
Yeah.
And the New Testament is a perfect example of that because there were so many different groups who had so many different beliefs who all followed Jesus.
Yeah.
You see that, don't you, even in like Paul's letters and stuff, where he's like advising other churches what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, and all that. So like it's even evident there in the text, isn't it? That sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's even like an air of chiding with him where he kind of like chides the other churches for their misbeliefs according to him, right? Like they were doing things wrong.
A lot of the early Christian groups, some of them believed that Christ was God literally come down to earth incarnate, that there was just one God, and then it was incarnate in Jesus. Some of them believed that God and Jesus were it gets complicated. God and Jesus were kind of one person, but Jesus didn't always exist. God, it kind of came about through God. And that kind of idea was knocked down at Nicaea in 325 when they all got together and beat out the kind of Trinity. So yeah, there's lots of different groups and lots of different ideas, and of course the what's now known as the Orthodox ideas were the winners in that whole thing. But the history of it is so messy.
Oh my gosh!
I was going to say history-wise because like it. I think it's generally believed, isn't it, that like Paul's letters are the first ones that were written down, and then it was like the Gospels, and then all the other stuff, and then Revelation came at the end. But like even that was a span of just decades and centuries.
Even the things with Paul's letters, though, they're not I mean, we don't need to go into the details here, but like some of them were thought to be forged and not by Paul. Some of them were thought to have been altered by later scribes. And even every little bit of the New Testament that you look into, there's this kind of mystery and intrigue and lots of things that make a jolly good film. But it's fantastic the way you look at it. But what's kind of agreed upon generally is the early church, or the early churches, or the early groups, all kind of had this idea that let's rewind a little bit to the book of Daniel.
Ooh, yes. Let's go
It
back.
wasn't until the book of Daniel, until the kind of idea came about that heaven was going to be a place on earth.
Right. I just want to stop on that for a second. Yeah, the idea that Jewish lore does not involve heaven and hell. And a lot of Christians that I've talked to, and a lot of them that I've seen talking, don't acknowledge that or understand that or even know that.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was a later insertion into the religion.
Well, that was kind of much later, because when we got, like I say, it was the book of Daniel's first kind of put the idea forward of the being in heaven on earth, which is what Jesus thought.
Right.
And it's what all the kind of early schools that followed Jesus thought.
And wasn't that popular historically in other religions too? Like, wasn't there, they call it something where like, it was popular in multiple religions throughout that area to start incorporating the idea of like, both heaven and earth heaven on earth, but also like heaven and hell, right? Like it was originally.
Well, heaven and hell came later.
Yeah.
The idea was essentially, and I'm painting a very black and white picture here, so feel free to beat me up about it in the comments on the group, and then we can have a proper discussion with nuance about it. But essentially, what happened was Jesus came along, and he was of this mind that there was going to be a heaven on earth and a big kind of apocalypse where the Lord would come down and judge people, and the enemies of the Lord would be smited and killed, and the good people would be raised up bodily from the grave and live on earth, which was heaven for eternity, if you like. That didn't happen.
And wasn't that heaven more like paradise? Like it wasn't like heaven.
Yeah.
We picture heaven as like clouds and like these pillars and gold and stuff like that. But it was more like just earth without the problems.
Yes.
Yeah, without the suffering and the pain.
And then it didn't happen. And Jesus didn't lead this revolution, and Jesus died, and all the people were led to will kind of believe in this story. We're thinking, well, we still believe in Jesus, but what we believed about Jesus was wrong. Let's kind of reinterpret.
Yeah, oops, we got it wrong.
Yeah, and that's where the concept of, because Judgment Day didn't come. So Judgment Day became judgment when you died.
A personal judgment.
That's where the idea of heaven and hell started to come from.
But they kept both concepts.
They did keep both concepts, but it was reinterpreted, and the winners, as we talked about earlier, were the ones who had this idea that you went up there if you were good, and down there for eternity if you were bad.
That's an example, isn't it, of where like these later ideas then come to influence things that have been written earlier, where we attribute other things that either Jesus said supposedly in the Bible or things that were in the Old Testament, or well, that's talking about heaven, or that's talking about hell.
Yeah, that's where the dodgy
things onto it, don't they?
And a great example of that is the word Christ, which literally is
Christos.
Yeah, it means the anointed one, and that's the Greek. Christ is a Greek word.
And there were many Christs at the time, weren't there? Like it wasn't uncommon.
Different characters,
yeah.
Because we'll come back to that. Let's set that aside just a minute.
Put a pin in it.
So we had the word for Christ, which was the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew anointed, which word for anointed one. And the anointed ones in the Old Testament were just the kings who were anointed with oil to show the heavenliness. These, not heavenliness, but the favor with God. Then these, there was kind of a big battle. Those all died out. Then an idea came about the Messiah, who was the future anointed one to come, and that all got mixed up with Jesus, who was this Jewish itinerant preacher, and that's kind of how that's a 3-second concise history of the Bible. But talking about the other people, which Laura touched upon, sons of God, the idea of sons of God, there were lots of these people, and it was a term that meant people had a special relationship with God. And there were lots of these guys about at the time. It wasn't just Jesus.
Yeah, it was it wasn't literal. It was figurative. It was very much of
the same way people say like children of God, meaning just like Christians or people of belief, or just that sort of general thing, isn't it?
And then that gets into the arguments of using the term brother, like brother. When at one point in the Bible, in the New Testament, when they mention like the brother of Jesus, was it his literal brother, or was it one of his followers, or was it just another Christian, like a fellow believer? Like, what do they mean by the word brother, right? So there's a lot of that. And
then you've got all the Gnostic Gospels, which some of them talk about the child of Jesus, some of them, and
was that literal or figurative? Yeah.
So that's the New Testament in a nutshell.
Speaking about some of the things you were talking about, I know one of the one of the commandments of the show is that we don't do prep, but I did a little bit of prep.
Oh, he prepped.
No, I just read.
Do
You
10 Hail
just
Marys.
literally
Do
had
10
me relate the entire history of the Bible to you from the top of my head.
And you
you've
did
been
prep.
sat there with prep.
I think you need to do 10 Hail Marys and maybe some
Yes.
backlashes.
I'll add it to my list.
Okay.
But yeah, I thought something that was kind of similar to what you were saying that was interesting was in the preface of, because this is the NIV I've got, a New International Version, that was written in America in the sort of mid to late 60s as a translation. And the preface is from the guys who did, it was the Committee on Bible Translation. So it's all about where this translation of the Bible came from and stuff. And it's not unusual in lots of things it says. But it's not some of the things that they were acknowledging in this. I'm just going to read a couple of tiny little excerpts. Were really fascinating from the point of, so hang on, I'll read it and then I'll make my point.
Yeah.
In regard to the divine name Yahweh, or capital YHWH, commonly referred to as the Tetragrammaton, the translators adopted the device used in most English versions of rendering that name as Lord in capital letters to distinguish it from Adonai, another Hebrew word rendered Lord, for which small letters are used. Wherever the two names stand together in the Old Testament as a compound name of God, they're rendered Sovereign Lord. And then it talks about how it talks about names, but then the other thing that it talked about was the footnotes of this version are of several kinds, most of which need no explanation. In the New Testament, footnotes that refer to uncertainty regarding the original text are introduced by some manuscripts or similar expressions. In the Old Testament, evidence for the reading, and it tells you about where the sources come from. It also talks about how minerals, flora, fauna, architectural details, articles of clothing and jewelry, musical instruments, and other articles cannot be identified with precision. There's like vagueness in terms of measurements of capacity in biblical periods. But just it's interesting how, like, even in the copy of the Bible that I was reading from, they're talking about how, there's decisions we've made which take us further away from the original text from which these manuscripts came from.
Yes.
Even though we don't have those texts anyway, and how they acknowledge that there are multiple ideas about various bits of the wording. There's things that they just acknowledge they do not know what they mean, and so they have to give an approximation of what it would be in today's.
Or an inference.
Yeah, absolutely. They talked about how they made some decisions of translation based on sort of conventions of former English translations of the Bible. And I've spoken before about translation specifically as being an issue for me in terms of seeing the Bible as any sort of authoritative sort of message from God, because translation from two modern day languages, it's incredibly difficult to get an exact meaning from one language to another, even languages that are really similar, languages that have evolved from the same, like two Latin languages, like say French and Spanish. Even really simple things from one language to another, it's really difficult. And let alone then when you've got a book which was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek from different periods in time and different places, where we only have copies of translations of copies of copies of copies of copies of translations of copies, with no original documents, or a fragment here or a fragment there that have been pieced together, where we know that people have made like on purpose made changes to things for political reasons, for ideological reasons. The King James Bible, for example, King James, when he wanted the Bible to be translated into English, wanted it to be, just as one really small anecdotal example, wanted it to be sort of government positive. Just deciding when there's like two or three translations of a specific word, deciding which one suits your aims and goals more.
Right.
And it obviously all of this, well, some of that was in the preface that I've just read bits from in here. But I think when I was a Christian, lots of my rebuttals to that, like I said, would have been there. It doesn't matter about those little words. It doesn't matter about these slight differences in translation because God's guided it all. And the whole message is clear. Like the stories are still there and they still have the same points in them. And whether it's someone wearing a loincloth or whether they're wearing a sack of potatoes, like it doesn't really matter what's, there's tiny little details because the message is still true and the things that are happening there are still true and still have value and purpose.
Which is interesting because that is not true. That's not to interrupt you, but
no.
That is a very, very no. So I just got so excited, but that is very, very common. Is the whole like, well, none of that really matters because we still have this big, broad, general message. But that is not necessarily true because some of these translation issues and translation errors significantly change how we look at the Bible and how people perceive it. And so the one that I can think of most readily off the top of my head is when I was moving from Christianity and Islam, I was challenged about the whole, because I was like, well, Jesus never says that he is God, right? And if you look at the
so is that whole tussle in the interrogation when he's taken to like Pilate and stuff, isn't there, about trying to get him to say those words or something?
Yeah, there was that, but there was also like, so he mentions that it's like, oh no, look right here in the text, he actually says he's the Son of God, right? Or oh no, it says I and the Father are one, right? Oh look, it's perfectly clear in the Bible that it says I and the Father are one. And then you read the next sentence and it says, just as anyone who believes in the Father and in me are also one, right? So it's basically that translation to me is enough to say, hey, anyone who believes in God is one with God. And it's a very like sort of transcendental state of mind versus an actual being being one with God. But it's little things like that where that is crucial when you talk about, oh, it's just a tiny little translation error, or it might be just a tiny little, the way they worded it to give a certain impression really can fundamentally change, or even just the way that you read the sentence and leave out the next sentence, right? Can fundamentally change the way that the information is presented.
And I think even more potentially, I use the word dangerous liberally here, but even more potentially dangerous is when you get translations in inverted commas of the Bible where they've just taken a modern day English version of the Bible and basically just then paraphrased it to mean something slightly different. So like I read a couple of Bibles when I was a teenager that were like street language, sort of very like, I mean, they would have been completely out of date language now, but it was like ultra like cool language. I mean, I was never cool, even the way I'm saying this sounds uncool, but like cool street hip language. And
for Christians.
Yeah, for Christians. Oxymoron. But like, so those things is even more so where you're taking an English translation which has had all those decisions about translation gone into it, and then you're then deciding, right, well, what exactly does that mean in English, like translating it to a different English even adds so much more extra meaning or takes away meaning because people say, well, that's not as important, this is more important, and it's just personal preference, it's personal choice.
Neverton.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm so excited when Richard mentioned the Tetragrammaton, because when the Tetragrammaton, the YHWH and the Donai,
it sounds like someone from the Transformers, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
And he's a Decepticon.
Yeah, 100%.
Train of thought, come back. When the Tetragrammaton and the word Adonai, which was the word which meant my Lord, was actually mistranslated together. Those words were mistranslated together, and that is where we get the name Jehovah from. It's a complete mistranslation.
I have
that
heard
didn't come about until like I want to say at the very earliest, the 9th century, but I think it was actually much later than that. I think you're talking 10th, 11th century when that first came about, and it was just a scribal error. It was just people who were, because you had God referred to in these two distinct ways as Adonai, my Lord, and as the YHWH, the Tetragrammaton, and they just got put together. And as they were put together, the sounding of it became Jehovah.
Yeah.
So that's anybody who claims Jehovah is the name of God. It's just completely wrong. Completely wrong.
And that also, and this is slightly a sideline, but like part of my interest since leaving Christianity in the origins of the Bible and stuff led me to sort of look at the beginnings of sort of the Jewish faith and the Hebrews originally, and sort of the changes in what we understand as like traditional Jewish teachings, but in terms of like, I said in terms of like a lot, how like the God ideas sort of adapted to sort of then finally become what we get in the Bible. And I think, like I mentioned from the preface that I read about how the Tetragrammaton has just been translated in this version of the Bible as Lord, it sort of is one step away from that original sort of name of God in the Bible, which then sort of removes it from that history of these other gods that people worshipped sort of, in the beginning Hebrews and stuff. And I think that's a really interesting decision.
Can I just shamelessly self-promote as well on the issue of translation?
Oh, you should.
I've just done an episode of Skeptic Takeout all about translation, and it talks about Buddhist texts, it talks about the Quran, it talks about the Bible in different things, especially during the Reformation and print and how that came along. And regarding what Richard said earlier about you can mistranslate from one language to another, I actually gave an example in that of taking a script from the back of a French book, and I translated it word for word using just kind of the normal Google translator. And I got a friend of mine who's got a master's degree in linguistics, and I got him to translate it for me as well. And the difference between that is amazing. It's absolutely amazing when you apply just a little bit of knowledge.
Yep.
Because I was speaking specifically about an apologist who had a discussion with, who was mistranslating things left, right, and center out of context because he was doing it word by word. And that's
I remember as well, like, because I studied linguistics, French and German at university, and like in some of my translation lectures and seminars and stuff, like I remember lecturers, native speakers of various languages having arguments about how to translate one thing to another, a thing from one language to another. And they were like native speakers of those languages, of languages that exist nowadays, that we have millions and millions of native speakers of who can have those discussions. And we're talking about translation decisions from languages that no longer exist, where there are zero native speakers. And it's just that degree of separation, but still people put so much faith and trust in the words that are in this book, which bear no resemblance to what they originally would have done. But even if they did or didn't, we don't even know. Like, there's no way of knowing.
Yeah, there's no way of confirming.
No.
That's really interesting. So just to make it like really relevant to like the everyday person, just thinking of translations. So if you took something like, if I said like, I think Richard is really cool, and you guys can guess which Richard I'm talking about. I don't care.
We all know.
We all know. So what would that translate to in another language? So if you're talking about reading it in, say, an ancient text where you only have the strict definitions of each word, right? And it's been pieced together from different sources, and some of it might be somewhat suspect. If you were to translate it today, you would translate it to another language to say something along the lines of neat or fun or awesome or admirable or whatever. You'd have to come up with another adjective in that language, because cool has a completely different meaning if you say like, oh wow, my tea has gotten cool, right? But you might not have that additional context when you're talking about, like, so what I'm trying to talk about is like, what is it called? It's where you just have everyday banter language. What is it called? Like vernacular. Yeah. So you're not talking about like direct oh my god, my brain. You're not talking about direct definitions from the dictionary. You are talking about modern day use, and slang. Slang is the actual word I was looking for. So it changes the meaning of words.
It's right? like a really obvious, like, basic example is like the word sick. The word sick can mean great. The word sick can mean ill. The word sick can mean physical vomit on the floor.
Yeah.
Like, and that on the face of it seems to be a very easy word to define and translate. But, if I send one of you a text saying so-and-so sick, you could both of you native English speakers nowadays could have interpreted that in completely opposite ways.
Yeah.
Not just slightly different ways, but opposite ways. And you would only know the difference because of context, either of things I've said before or context of, something else going on. And I know people talk about all the time when they're talking about the Bible, oh, well, you're taking that out of context, or you need to know the context. But like, we can guess at some of the context.
How would you even know? Yeah.
Yeah, like if someone in 2,000 years looked at a text message that I sent to you referring to someone as sick, you would have no idea about the context around that. And that's even if you looked at my actual message. It's
and the context is something I'm very adamant about trying to get across a lot of the time as well. So not just to like believers, but also to critics who are non-believers who decide that they're suddenly experts after reading a single Bart Herman book, which there are a lot of in our community. And it depends how you're reading the Bible, because there isn't just a way to read the Bible. If someone's reading it from the aspect of being a believer and worship, they're reading it completely different to someone's doing textual analysis on it, or to somebody who's looking at how it was put together, or someone who's looking at it from a different historical perspective, or someone who's looking at it from the poetry perspective, or on and on and on. There are so many different ways to read
or even
it.
As believers, like there's a difference between like if you happen to be doing some study at home and you're reading a bit of the Bible just at random, or whether you're sat in a service at a church and the vicar or pastor or whatever is preaching a specific bit of the Bible, or you're listening to some Christian radio station and there's a bit of a Bible verse in a song, or you experience all those in different ways. And I think it's, like even just one of those examples that you said has so many subsets of how you could look at something, hear something, how you associate what you're hearing with what it's supposed to be meaning. And
I can sit in a sermon, and I have sat in sermons on many, many occasions, and I've never been a believer. But I've sat in sermons on many, many occasions, and I've heard the sermon spoken. It's been going through my head. I can relate that to X in Buddhism, or I can relate that to X in Islam, and because that's the context I was looking at from the different perspectives and how things. And it's so easy to do. It all depends on how you're listening. It all depends largely on your intent.
So that brings up another fascinating look at the Bible, not as like the word of God, but just as a cultural phenomenon, right? Like, so we don't know the original authors and what their original intent was, right? And so if we can agree on that, let's look at like, say, a modern day author or a modern day songwriter, right? And you'll hear a song or you'll read a book and you'll start to infer all these different meanings, all these different intentions, and here's what the author must have been meaning or thinking or feeling at this time, or here's what they mean. And you'll have all these people in forums arguing over like what the deeper meaning is behind a said story or song, right? And then the author will come in, and if they're a good author, they'll say, no, each person is right because the story needs to speak to each individual person the way that it speaks to them. But you'll have people come in and say, well, I originally wrote this song because of this, or my original intention with this part of the story was that, and it could be completely wrong from what people think. But then the question becomes, does that really matter? Like, does the author's intention matter? So now, but this is only
necessarily, would it?
It wouldn't, but this is only looking at the Bible from a literary perspective, not a Word of God perspective, because that's a whole another argument. Like, does it matter from a literary perspective if person A or person B or person C is right, if they're drawing something out of it that has meaning to them, right? Like that is where it becomes interesting to me.
So I think as believers or non-believers, you can take some amazing things from the Bible, in terms of like, I mean, everyone jumps straight at things like the Sermon on the Mount, and most of that has some, great moral ideas and stuff like that. But I've kind of forgotten what my point was. What did you say, Laura?
I was just talking about,
sorry. Yeah, you can get different things out. And I think one thing, linking back to what Jilliver was saying a bit ago about sitting in a sermon, I remember as a Christian often sitting in a church, listening to things being said to me, and a passage from the Bible would really speak out to me. And I really felt a deep connection of like, this is God speaking to me. No one else in this church is getting this message because this is for me. But it's funny because I had the same feeling when you watch like a rubbish Hallmark Christmas film and there's a bit in there that's just like, it's like, oh yeah, that really, like it's not just a thing with the Bible that happens, and it kind of felt like it was at the time, but it's certainly sometimes I'll be watching Jeremy Kyle show,
or memes on Facebook. How often do memes on Facebook speak just to you, like they were on your Facebook feed for you?
I'm very conscious that we're short of time, and I really want to get to Laura's subject before we go.
Yeah, so that might be an okay closing subject in the sense of just really quickly what your guys' thoughts are. It'd be cool to delve into more, but we wouldn't really necessarily have a lot of time for it. But the question of which Bible. So what a lot of people don't think about, or what I run into a lot, is the realization that there's not just multiple translations of one text of the Bible. There's multiple whole different Bibles, right? Like that include different books and different gospels or whatever. And we're not just talking about the ones that got dismissed, like at the Nicene Creed or whatever, like, oh, sure, there were ancient texts like that were in the Dead Sea Scrolls or whatever, and those were dismissed, and we know those aren't part of the Bible. Like, let's pretend those don't even exist. Just the Bibles that exist today. There's an Ethiopian Bible, there's an Orthodox Russian Bible, there's the American, like, whatever, modern Bible, there's the Catholic Bible, and the Protestant Bible have different books that are accepted as canon, right? So when we say the Bible, my first question is always which Bible, because it ends up typically being, if you're a Catholic, it ends up being the Catholic Bible when you're talking about the Bible. When you're Protestant, it ends up being the Protestant Bible, right? But they're totally different.
And again, that's the only thing that I learned after leaving Christianity as well. And it is interesting because it's one of those things where, like, I think earlier on I compared like how I wouldn't have, can't remember what I said, but like I wouldn't have accepted these things of other religions. It's like that, like, of course the Bible that I read is the right one. All the other Christians got it wrong. It's exactly, and it's a fallacy. But I think it's through, and I don't mean this in a mean-spirited way, but ignorance of those sorts of issues, isn't it? Like, Christians don't have any reason they don't have any reason to search for that sort of information because it's not relevant to, strengthening their faith. It's not relevant to furthering their walk with Christ. It's irrelevant to that.
Yeah. Richard, what are your thoughts on that from like a more scholarly?
I think it's always been the case of the Bible as different books. Even the Old Testament, a lot of people concentrate on the New Testament, but even the Old Testament, when it was made up of different books and it had different books in it, some different points throughout history until it got made into the modern day Bible. So, and then you come into the modern time and not only have you got different like mainstream groups like the Catholics and stuff, you've then got the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons who tend to use the King James Bible but put their own spin on it, or groups like the Christadelphians who aren't Trinitarians, and they all use the Bible. They all have different interpretations and different ways of viewing it, and
all those different people use the Bible, the sort of similar text, to espouse incredibly different views about like social issues and political preferences about things. Like you can use the Bible, and again we're saying the Bible, which Bible? But even if everyone was using the exact same translation of the exact same copy or whatever with the same books in it, you could still use that in
different ways.
Espouse completely contrasting views about topics. Completely.
Yeah, you can use it to justify slavery, and you could use it to say that slavery is immoral. You could use it to justify abortion and to say that abortion is bad. Yeah.
Without even trying to be actively misusing it or anything, like with the best will.
No, with very good intentions.
I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier as well about the winners of. It's a good example of the winners are the ones who go down in history, because even now the correct Bible is the Orthodox one. And although there are different versions of the Bible, it's the Orthodox one that everybody, the kind of majority of people, even scholars, take as kind of, this is the Bible.
And now, just to be clear, because a lot of people don't know this, when you say the Orthodox Bible, doesn't it have something, and I'm going to forget the exact number, it's like 11 more books than the Protestant Bible, right?
Remember.
I can't remember the exact 11. Okay, so 11 is what popped into my head, and I don't know that it's correct, but so when you say the Orthodox Bible, it has additional books to what you would normally see in like the Protestant. What's a popular translation, like the
NIV?
NIV, yeah.
Yeah.
There's
when
less
I said the Orthodox Bible, I mean the Bible with 66 books in. The 66 books of the Bible is generally what most people consider to be the Bible.
Yeah.
Whichever one that is, because
whichever. Yeah, I don't remember, and I'm probably speaking like I'm probably making a fool of myself. But yeah. So that very, very interesting topic. I could probably talk on for hours, but we are at the end of our time. So really quick closing thoughts, guys, and then we'll do our goodbyes and kick off.
I'll just finish by saying I still haven't finished reading the Bible, and I have started it a good few times, and I do want to get through it, which seems to be a common thing for former Christians to want to do. But I just think the more people know about something, the better. The more that someone knows about something, the better informed their opinions about it and how much they should value it can be. That wasn't an English sentence, but you know what I mean. And so and I think that stands for believers and non-believers. And it's, learn things about stuff.
Yes.
I'm going to go left field, and I'm going to say, if you are a believer in the Bible, that's fine. It doesn't matter. I just implore you to look at it and study it and do a bit more historical analysis of it. Just understand that I'm not saying don't believe in it. I'm saying look at it critically and understand how it was put together. It needn't affect your faith. Some of the best scholars in the world who know this shit
maintain their faith.
Christians.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to lose your faith. Just be more critical. Don't accept that the Gospels were written by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Don't think that the first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses, because it's bullshit. You're doing nobody any favors, especially yourself.
The things we've been saying about, we don't have the originals, it's translations and copies. That doesn't necessarily mean that things that are written in the Bible are untrue. It doesn't mean that, does it? We might have good reason to think that some of the things are untrue, but we don't know.
It's 2 separate topics. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I would say, my closing comment is that, like other lasting works of literary genius, right? The Bible has this rich, complicated, compelling, intriguing, very controversial past in history, and it's very, very neat to learn more about it. So yeah, like what Gilliver said, whether you're a believer or not a believer, for me, what I wanted to get out of this discussion was just how complex, just the discussion alone of the Bible really is. There's just so much color to it, and so many potential rabbit holes you could take. So yeah, be curious about it and ask questions about it, and get excited about it. You never know what you're going to learn. So having said that, thank you guys all for listening. We will catch you guys next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe and to share our stuff so that we can grow our numbers. So we will see you next week. Just as a reminder, we are Laura,
Richard,
and this has been Skeptic Hangout. Until next time,
stay curious.
Interrogate your beliefs.
I fucking forgot the line.
I was supposed to say keep questioning. You were supposed to say stay curious.
So just carry on doing whatever you're doing, guys.
Do it. Bye.